So I've got the engine out of our 535. Still a lot of stuff to pull off. All the wiring harness, everything else. It certainly is a tight fit. I had to loosen up the rack and pinion to make sure I could clear it with the differential, because you can't get the differential out without removing the cross member. I also had to remove the left-hand engine mount bracket, because otherwise it was going to get hung up on our steering shaft here as well. So the next step now is get the engine apart and see what's failed, fix it, put it all back together. This is pretty much all the upper cylinders, cams, some timing gear stuff. Got the cylinder head off. Cylinder head looks actually pretty good. The sealing surfaces all look really good. Combustion chambers look fine. Haven't pulled any valves out yet, but we'll get to that. And we've got our engine block that's sitting over on our tool tray. So I've got the oil pan off of the engine block, and I was looking over everything. That looks normal, that looks normal, and then we get to number 6 and we can see how it's a dark blue color or black, and then when I grab it, there's a knock. So it's a rod knock and it spun that bearing. There wasn't a lot of debris in the oil pan, but obviously that bearing has failed. Pretty much non-existent. The bearing is just welded to the crank. There it is. Piston doesn't look bad. Rod's definitely trashed. So I'm going to keep taking out the rest of the pistons and actually get the crank all the way out. To get the crank out, I've got to be able to split this entire saddle. So there's a pot line right here. So I'll get out all of my pistons first, then undo my main bearing bolts, and then all of my perimeter bolts up in here, get this whole saddle off, see what the crank looks like. When I rotate the engine using a regular big ratchet, it is not smooth at all, so it feels like there's still some more damage deeper in. And at least we know what the knock is. Now we just got to see what the extent of the damage and what caused that problem. It's definitely oil starvation, but why it happened, I don't know yet. So we were looking for the pieces of bearing because we only could really see one half and it was stuck to the crank. So I just started to pry at it, and then I found the other half had actually slipped underneath the bearing. So there's actually 2 bearings welded onto this crank here. And I mean, I've been hammering at this with a plastic mallet and my pry bar just to kind of peel this off of that crank. The surprising thing is, I mean, yeah, the crank scored, but it's really not that bad a shape considering what's happened to this journal. So we've got our BMW 535 completely stripped down. This is the one that had an engine knock in it, which turned out to be a connecting rod bearing had spun. We've started cleaning things up. I can see here in the oil pan though, we've still got pieces of babbitt from the bearing. It was a pretty dramatic failure. We've still got to kind of do a lot of cleanup here. Haven't even pulled the cylinder head completely down. I'll get into that. Do a full valve service. We'll show you that as that starts to happen. But so far, I mean, it doesn't look horrible up there. Just got to kind of get into it and see what it looks like. Still got a lot of other stuff to wash. We got the camshafts here. Started washing up pistons. Not sure where these are right now since we're this far down. You can see the little wear right there on the graphite pad. Doesn't look real horrible, but I'll get to measuring those a little bit later. Over here we've got, this was the rod that actually failed. You can see how much heat has gone into it. This is the bearings, and these bearings were just, had to be chiseled off the crankshaft. It was that bad. One had spun over the top of the other, and you can see here this has definitely happened from a lack of lubrication issue. Now the engine had a lot of oil leaks when it came in, so I'm not sure if it just ran out of oil or whether there was a pressure supply problem. That's something we're going to have to address before everything goes back together. The engine block has been just had an initial clean. I still haven't gone through all the oil galleys yet and scrubbed that out. That's going to happen next. And so far we've got our crankshaft has gone to my crank grinder. It also seemed to be that it was not straight when it was sitting in the main bearing tunnel, even with all the rods off. It didn't want to rotate very well, so waiting on a report back from that. I also sent the turbocharger out to be rebuilt. Now the turbo didn't look too bad, though it did have normal wear showing on the shaft, and we'll show you that once we get it back from the rebuilders, see how that goes. From a price standpoint, the gentleman was very reasonable. It's the first time I'm using him, and we'll see what it looks like.